I'd just like to point out, of course, that having started 30 years ago, I was very, very young. I guess, as Antonio said, Imants will actually talk about his work, and the first question I'd like to ask, really to start with, is in terms of this particular project, perhaps you could just talk about some of your influences or some of the decisions that you made in terms of coming up with this particular design.
Yeah, I think I should say that this is the first time my work has been turned into a tapestry, so I'm quite excited about that. And the process is quite incredible. And I mean, a lot of my practice comes from using quotation and appropriation. And in a sense, we have a sort of double transformation here, from my original source into a painting and then my painting into a tapestry. And I think that's quite interesting. It's a form of subtle abstraction, I think. I mean, with this work, the Warm Memorial approached me just before we were going overseas for 5 weeks, and I had to have a concept pretty much on returning back to Australia. But fortunately, I was already working in the kind of, in the right sort of territory, I suppose, to be able to come up with something quite quickly. And I decided that, I mean, it had to relate very strongly to World War I and Gallipoli, and but I didn't want to actually have battle scenes or scenes of the actual historical event, and I thought I wanted something that was more subtle and gentle, and still kind of commemorative of the event. So this image of the kind of roadway leading into the distance with an avenue of trees just seemed like a good starting point. And the source for it is actually a work by the Swiss artist Ferdinand Hodler, and so it is actually the European landscape painted around, the turn of the century, the 20th century. And it just suggested to me a kind of avenue of remembrance, which this avenue is sort of planted to remember the fallen, really. And I also thought of the people left behind, the parents and the siblings and the friends, how they're impacted also, by the deaths of these young men. And somehow I was already working with the right kind of sentiments, it's a sort of language of, with kind of sadness, and a lot of the phrases which I was already using seemed completely appropriate to this project.
If anybody has any questions at all, with that roving mic, just stick your hand up and Imants and myself.
I don't need a roving mic. Imants, when I first saw this artwork of yours, struck from Tapestry, I was taken, the first thing I saw was the autumnal palette that you've used here. And there used to be, around the time that it started the First World War, a Melbourne sculptor who did a lot of memorial work for the First World War, and he used the Australian gum leaf as a motif of the Australian soldiers. And the fallen gum leaf was a symbol of the fallen soldiers, the dead soldiers. And I saw those yellow shapes there, and that reminded me of sort of autumnal leaves, and I wondered if they were consciously, subconsciously meant to refer to the soldiers that were fallen or falling and on the ground had died.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question. I mean, in a way, I sort of work incredibly intuitively. You know, it's not actually kind of thought through in a rational way. I mean, I can think of the falling leaves and gum leaves, but well, I mean, in this work, really, I'm referring more to the Western Front and the European landscape, you know, that would have been there. And, you know, I think falling leaves in autumn, it's kind of a nice metaphor, you know, for the loss of life and, you know, the passing of people. And especially the leaves on the ground. And they also kind of look a bit like, they're not red like blood, but, you know, they're sort of, they have other connotations as well.
Those yellow shapes, for instance.
Well, the yellow shapes, it's really like a screen across the whole image, and the source is actually in the work by Rosalie Gascoigne, where she's cut up you know, short string boxes. But I've kind of eliminated the structure of the box, and it's just become this kind of cut up text, I suppose. I mean, something that looks like there was text originally, or is turning into text. Yeah, it's like a screen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perhaps I could actually talk about my response as a weaver to Imants' work. I think the first thing that we do is we look at it quite analytically, but always when you see a work, there's an emotional response to it. And for my part, the Avenue of Trees is actually something that I see quite regularly. I travel to Adelaide at least once a year, and in the old days, none of the towns were bypassed by bigger roads, and you always used to go through, and the main road would actually have an avenue of trees. And from quite an early age, I was sort of very aware of their significance, and I think that seeing these, even though your source is from overseas, I think it's something that Australians can actually relate to quite well, particularly in rural areas.
Yeah, well, I think often Australian towns have European trees, you know, planted down the main street. Yes. So it is kind of, you know, an echo of Australia as well, in a sense.
There's also the fact that there's no people in it, although it is in fact hugely about people, that's a very barren landscape in terms of people. And for us, I think that while day to day we're really concerned with the making of the tapestry, I think that whenever we stand back, there's a very sort of strong, well, an incredibly strong feeling of desolation. With the vortex up in the right, it's sort of a bit end of world like, and I think that that's probably how a lot of people thought of it at the time, and certainly for a lot of people it was. But it is probably a particularly emotional piece to work on for the weavers. Some of the phrases are quite gut-wrenching. Having to weave the word bereft on 3 occasions now. Bereft is an incredibly strong word. Or they weep here, which has also been repeated. These are all really sort of strong phrases, which I think when this tapestry is actually hanging, I think they're the phrases that people come back to quite regularly, that you don't necessarily see immediately, but you do come back to. If there are any questions about the actual technical side of the weaving or or interpretive side of the weaving as well.
With the Imants Tiller's tiles, were you quite determined to make that very obvious, or is it... Oh, sorry. With the tiles, the artwork being made of separate tiles, are you making that very, very obvious, or is it just going to be quite... It looks from here that it's very subtle?
It does come and go a bit. We had a discussion with Imants at the very beginning, and the phrase that Imants used was a ghost of a reference, and we've sort of held to that. So sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't. Sometimes we actually weave over the top of it, because structurally that's actually probably a better thing to do. You can probably see at the moment the horizontal ones more clearly than the verticals, because we've just reached an area where in the blue section where in fact you can see the tiles. We're not doing the tiles. If there's no change of colour or tone, in fact you won't see the edge of the tile as much. So sometimes that's quite marked on the painting and sometimes it's not, but we're not doing the actual line that you see, which is the shadow line of the tile itself.
And do you want to comment, sorry, do you want to comment on the fact that the artwork and the tapestry are the same size rather than a different scale?
I'm not sure if I should hand that one to you. It is unusual for us to work one-to-one, that's true. There are a lot of reasons why our first choice would be to not work one-to-one. But having said that, everything we do is a challenge, and whether the challenge comes from a technical aspect or whether it comes from some other source, it's all integral to what we actually do. But perhaps I could actually ask Imants to maybe explain why he works the size that he does.
Well, this is not really a maquette, because only the top 4 rows actually are the same as the tapestry, and the bottom 9 rows are actually, well, the bottom 9 rows constitute a separate work which was pre-existing. And in fact, I've changed the words from that to the tapestry to eliminate all references to a small white dog, which is what it was produced for in the first place. And instead, put in the kind of locations in France and Belgium, and it's perfectly appropriate. I mean, the original work at the bottom was done as a really heartfelt painting about loss, personal loss, and so the actual text seemed very appropriate, for the loss of, the personal loss of young men, largely. So the thing is that when the tapestry actually is a unique work of art that doesn't actually have a full-scale maquette left behind.
And the tile size is one that you've actually used all the time.
Yeah, and it was actually a very happy coincidence that I was able to add to this existing image and make it the actual size that they wanted the tapestry. I mean, that was pure good luck, actually.
Well, I'd like to thank you for the 19 extra playstones. Wherever you think there's an empty space on the artwork, there is in fact probably at least one playstone. But at the same time, I mean, it is a challenge, but it's so much a part of what the artwork is about, is these playstones which just appear. And there's so much history to all of them, and we've had people come in visiting who've really thought, who've looked at them and have had some connection to a particular place. There was someone who came in whose brother had been at Polycon Wood as a young doctor, and so she was really excited about it. And I think we've often had people coming in who've got who've had some family member at some of the places that are on the tapestry, and I think again that's going to be a really powerful part of the work.
Well, one of the things that the War Memorial did, right at the start, they gave me a list of all the places that Australians are buried, in the Middle East and also in Europe, in a sort of hierarchy of numbers. So I tended to use the places that had most deaths, and then others I chose really because they're quite poetic, in some cases very poetic names. The actual kind of text, the sort of emotional text, a lot of them come from an Austrian author who I'm very keen on, Thomas Bernhard. And his writing is a kind of, it's a kind of no holds barred kind of self-revelation. And there's some phrases there, particularly because of your covenant with desolation, the greatest calamity affecting a person, the inscrutability of heaven, I just think is quite an amazing couple of phrases. And I thought it was very appropriate to this work. But the other thing too, of course, was that I did read the Murdoch letter, which is, I think, 10,000 words, and I think a lot of the sentiments of Thomas Bernhard are actually echoed by Murdoch's letter, and in fact I chose just one phrase from his text, which I thought summed up most of what he was saying. And the phrase, it's very poetic too, it was congealed incompetency. And it kind of summed up the campaign.
Yes, we've still to come to all those phrases that they're all in the top 4 rows, which we've just started. I'm not sure if people have had a look. Most of this tapestry is actually rolled down. The 4th row from the top is actually just about to start. And that's where really those phrases that are particular to the First World War really start. And some of, as well as some of the other places. Any more questions?
Chris, as an avid watcher of Tapestry's image plays, I was very interested to hear that you find that emotional work to produce. Largely, I see it as a spatial feel, and I'm very interested in when you're weaving this, whether or not because if you look at the work behind you at the present time, it's very much patches of colour and texture on a spatial field. Many of the tapestries that are produced here and that you work on have a stronger structure that you can follow. Lines might run through somewhere else. I'm just very interested to hear about how you make something strong which is incredibly diffuse.
I think the work in itself, while it might seem to be open, I think that it is a very intimate piece, and I think that the phrases on it and the places and the history, I think you can't separate one from the other. And we're working also in very little pieces at a time, so we have a tile that we're trying to do 1 tile per 3 days. So in a way we're actually, the space is quite an intimate space as we're doing it. I think the strength comes from its simplicity as well. It's not just the words on it. I think there's a simplicity in it, and quite often simple images have a very strong integrity and a very just a really strong feel to them. And I think that we, as a team, we definitely are looking at all the components that actually make the tapestry, the technical side of it, trying to get the colours right. But at the same time, the most important thing to us is actually to try and maintain that whole feeling and that integrity. And to sort of do justice to the fact that these phrases are very emotional and very poignant and will have a lot of meaning to other people. So there are all sorts of things that we are constantly thinking about while we're doing it. Not necessarily every second as we're sewing up against a line of text, but when we're weaving it, I think that some pieces that we work on have a different nature and they're joyous and we try and relate that as much as the image. I think that what we're always trying to do is to get some sort of essence of the artwork and the artist. I hope that we're doing it. It certainly feels like it for us that's what we're managing to do that. So I don't know if I've answered your question well enough. But
Yeah, I had a question about the painting. Could you explain how you construct it? Because it's very painterly, but there's also there's a lot of surface texture to it.
Yeah, well, the paintings are highly layered, and basically there's a lot of coming out with a scalpel rather than painting with a brush. I mean, the larger areas are painted with a brush, but all the detail is actually kind of masked and cut, including the text and the pattern and or even all the forms. And what that does, it kind of I also use metallic paint, which is quite bright and reflective, but sort of tempered by painting it with gouache, which is very matte. So the layers kind of, it makes the surface quite alive, because there's a slight relief in the surface. And the panels are really done one panel at a time, but then the whole process carried through for the whole number of them. I'd say probably there's between 10 and 15 separate layers of paint. So it's also quite strange then seeing it translated into a single layer, of threads.
And of course we haven't done any metallic. We've used mercerised cotton basically to try and achieve a similar sort of sheen, and we can get the mixing that you do in a way because we have 11 strands on our bottom. Theoretically they could all be different. We try not to be quite so complicated, but every now and again there will be one that has 11 different colours on it. But yes, I mean there are challenges in terms of that, but they're all interpretive challenges that we've discussed with you. That's part of the collaborative process, which is such a sort of an integral part of the way we work, and it certainly is what brings us in to continue doing what we do, is our opportunities to work with people like you.
Well, what I like about this particularly is that there are no tricks, like using metallic paint and the same metallic thread for the text, and yet from a distance it still stands out a bit as though it were metallic. So I don't know how you've done that, but
you have to come and work here for 30 years,
Imants, I've just got a question about that at the end of the road. You've got that beautiful subtle pink that suggests to me sunset and brings to mind the Menon Gate and Last Post and the going down of the sun, we will remember them. Is that deliberate?
Yeah, no, it is the sunset, in fact. I mean, it's kind of a subtle sunset. Yeah, so I thought that was actually appropriate as well. I mean, the war memorial actually was very helpful, you know, in the initial stages, and they showed me, you know, a whole lot of watercolours and drawings and a whole lot of material which was actually done on site, you know, in Gallipoli and elsewhere. And in a way that was quite helpful because it made me decide to do a completely different kind of image. You know, one that wasn't so site-specific, I suppose.
Where would the harmony going to be in the
Sorry?
where is this going to be hung?
Well, I think in the War Memorial we have a display area, you know, with paintings and other objects.
Permanently.
I hope so. Fairly permanently.
There are actually a couple of images on our board over here which show the wall that it's going on.
So you've actually designed it with the space in mind?
No, they gave me the dimensions and space.
And light and
Yeah,
space and
yeah.
all that.
Yeah, actually when they first approached me I was kind of very moved in a way because, you know, coming from a migrant background, you know, none of my ancestors are Australian, you know, veterans. And I thought it was actually, so therefore I thought I was highly motivated to do something that would speak also more generally, not just to Australians, but, you know, to other, well, you know, a lot of people in Australia have fled conflicts, as my parents did too, but from all over the place.
I think that probably, while it does say Gallipoli and it has all the place names, I think that it's very much has a feel of sort of a much more universal feel. It is specific, but at the same time, as you say, I mean, our conflicts are conflicts, so I think that everybody can sort of connect in some way to us.
Do any of your members of your family involved in the First World War?
I'm not quite sure about that. I think perhaps my parents, you know, fathers may have been, but I don't have much knowledge of that really. I mean, my father was actually involved in the Second World War as a kind of 18-year-old on the other side. He was a prisoner of war and then released. So, you know, I do have that kind of a bit of an understanding of what it meant to be involved in something like that.
Imants, have you ever had the desire to have any of your things as the first work we've done of yours as a tapestry? Had you ever had a desire to have any of your work translated into tapestry? Was it a kind of a wish that you had?
No, but actually under Sue Walker, Sue Walker did approach me informally, I don't know, 30 years, 25 years ago. And I don't know, I thought, I think part of the problem is that, you know, this was a particularly good commission because there was actually a generous artist's fee, and normally, you know, artists almost do it for, you know, gratis, to have a work translated into tapestry. And while I think it's a fantastic thing in itself, you know, I think the artists deserve to have a fee for their effort as well. So that's why I didn't pursue it 30 years ago.
Can I ask you what the collaboration has been like between the artists and the weavers, and whether that cooperation has produced any changes either in the work or in the minds of either the artist or the weaver?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because Chris tried to get me to change the order of text in the painting at one point. So I kind of had...
Purely for a time point of view.
So I had to find a kind of gracious way to resist that. But in fact, I found the process fantastic, and if I were living in in Melbourne, as Juan de Vera was when he was doing his tapestry, I think I'd be dropping in here on a weekly basis, just to see how it was going. Because it is actually very, very satisfying to see it being translated in such a beautiful way.
From our point of view, Imants has been exceedingly open with his collaboration, and yes, I did suggest, I made a fleeting suggestion about the text, but we do have a very, very tight time frame on this, and it was one idea that we looked at if it looked like we weren't going to be able to do it. There's more text as we go up, and so even though the image itself becomes simpler, it was one thing that we actually looked at. Having said that we looked at it, it wasn't something that we really particularly were keen to do. It was purely strategic. So we're pretty confident that we don't need to go anywhere near that again. But in itself, it was quite an interesting exercise, because some of the questions which we asked at that point actually brought up other issues and other areas of importance, I guess, that maybe had been glossed over or lost in earlier discussions. So it's continually a learning process for us, and continually an exercise in collaboration and interpretation. So when we work with an artist who's particularly open to that, like Imants has been, that actually makes the whole experience certainly worthwhile from our point of view as well. So, yeah.
I mean, one point about the text is that in a way, the text is the first element that's set out, and it's really like a kind of spatial poem that interacts with the image. So that's why I didn't really want to move lines around, because it was kind of, integral to the whole thing.
Since you had to translate almost three-dimensional painting into a two-dimensional tapestry, did the weavers have to use actually more tones, more colours to try and translate that two-dimensionality?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. For us, I think it's just really looking at the artwork and using our experience to actually work out how we're going to approach it. We do samples. There's a board on the my left-hand side, your right-hand side, which has samples on it. They're our starting point. So we use them to look at colour and the effect of colour, and also it means that we can actually then step back from them to a certain distance, the distance that maybe the artwork will hang, the tapestry will ultimately hang in, so we can see it up quite close. We can also see it from a distance. So we can use those samples to, I guess, really work out where we're going and what our overall focus will be in terms of pitching, tone and colour. But I think that we probably tend to do that very intuitively without really sort of thinking too much. We've all got lots and lots of experience on the loom. There's a wealth of experience on the loom, There's 5 people involved in this tapestry, and they're all highly trained, and just we really rely on each other day to day to sort of look at what we're doing and have conversations day to day on the loom too, to make sure that we're on track, that the colours that we're using are continuing to be used across the loom. We move around a little bit, so we're not always sitting in the same place. So I'm not sure, is that...
Yes, well, it was probably the wrong question. You don't actually ask yourself that kind of question.
Well, we probably do, but probably not out loud. I think that it's all done in our head. So, yeah.
What I think is phenomenal is that you can match the colour sitting over here, just looking over there.
We try not to get too close to the artwork. That's one of our methods of working one-to-one. So we've tried to separate ourselves a little bit in terms of, we don't want to put too much detail in. We want to be able to give the effect of what Imants has been doing without it being, it's not a literal copy, it's definitely an interpretation. So we try and mix colours from a distance, I guess. Yeah.
Chris, can I ask, is that something that you do with all of the works? Meaning it's not just for this particular thing, is it always the same?
In terms of mixing colour?
Well, in terms of you interpreting, not just the image obviously has to be, nearly the outline of it has to be correct, but we were talking about the colour referencing them. Is that what happens with all of the works?
Yes. Well, they're all interpreted. I mean, we interpret in the same way that a musician will interpret a composer's work. You can hear very different variations of a piece. The notes are the same, but the way they interpret is different. Or if language is interpreted, if you have a poem in one language, do you follow the rhythm? Do you follow the metre? Do you follow the rhyme? Do you follow the content exactly, so word for word, or how do you interpret that? And they're the questions that we sort of look at. How are we going to interpret this so that we can actually stay true to the essence of the artwork and the essence and integrity of the artist, and yet still have it as an artwork in itself, which is different, but connected, but true to its own medium. It is a tapestry, it's a woven medium, and so we're true to that medium.
I have one more question. Before you mentioned the vortex on the right, yes, here, but in actual fact I love Imants to talk about that particular reference. Is there something else going on there that is a double meaning?
Oh, well, it's based on a star, on a nebula, a galaxy, photograph of a galaxy. But it's been reversed, so it's, instead of being lined, it's blank. But it's also like a tornado or cyclone or...
What if I were to say it looks like somebody's eye?
It kind of vaguely does, yeah. Yeah, and so that was really the kind of reference to the war itself, I suppose. That it's kind of like something approaching.
Vortex is probably our word for, so that's what it is. If we have to name it, that's what we call it, so we know what we're talking about. But for us it's a word. It's not necessarily to do with the meaning.
We know that now they think at the centre of the galaxy there's actually a black hole, right? Which is why the stars are moving around in a vortex. They're being sucked into the dark, into the black hole.
It's quite, in a way, it's sort of generic because you think of things like weather issues, climatic issues, but I really have like something is watching over the situation, as well as all of those other references, including the fact that it could be vortex.
But I didn't intended to be an eye.
I'd just like to ask Imants a question. You have a long and illustrious art practice career. I'd be interested in a reflection from you on whether designing this work and it being the first translation of Tapestry, whether or not it might impact on the future work that you do. And if hypothetically you were asked tomorrow to do a Tapestry design, would you use a different starting point?
Yeah, no, that's also a good question. I mean, I think from time to time I have sort of done works which are not paintings, including sculptures or I've done a few collaborations with architects, the Federation Pavilion being one. And they're always, and this being another, with the Tapestry, and I think they're always they're kind of projects that I am willing to take on, because they do actually force you out of your comfort zone. And it's quite often things will kind of come up as a result of it, for sure. I mean, I'd be quite keen to do another Tapestry.
Well, the weather's certainly didn't say no.
In fact, I've got the perfect thing. Not as big as this.
I don't have a question to ask you, but I do want to make a comment, or two comments actually. Firstly, congratulations to you, sir, and to the weavers for the picture you put before us here. I think it's very beautiful. But the gentle colours you have used in that is the antithesis of the carnage that occurred there. And I hope that everyone who stands before it gets the feeling of serenity and reverence that I feel when I stand here.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's really part of the intention, that in a setting where it's full of carnage, you do have a little something a bit quieter.